It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday in a quiet California suburb, a day no different from the hundreds before it. But by nightfall, a 14-year-old girl would vanish without a trace, leaving behind a timeline full of questions, and a silence that investigators still can't explain. No one realized that the neighborhood on Leisuretown Road would become the center of a mystery that has remained unsolved for years. Through the lens of investigators who would later dissect every minute, the last afternoon of Ayla Rodriguez's known life felt painfully ordinary, almost too ordinary. Neighbors recalled a warm, dry September day. Kids rode scooters, someone mowed a lawn, and traffic rolled by in slow, predictable hums. In the midst of all that normalcy, a 14-year-old girl stepped out of her front door around late afternoon. She wasn't carrying a backpack. She wasn't meeting anyone. Those details mattered later. One witness, a retired mail carrier, remembers seeing her walk toward the end of the block, her steps unhurried. She didn't look upset, he said, just thinking, like any teenager. That small observation would go on to puzzle detectives. Ayla left the house with no indication of distress, no sign she intended to run away. Inside the Rodriguez home, the timeline was becoming blurry the moment she stepped outside. Her phone, which she usually kept close, disconnected from the network shortly after. Not turned off, not drained. Disconnected, as if it had been destroyed or forcibly shut down. By evening, when dinner came and went without her return, her family made the first calls. At first, the assumption was simple. Maybe Ayla was out with friends. Maybe she lost track of time. Even officers responding to the initial report treated it as a likely runaway, until they started calling those same friends. And one by one, the answers didn't match. Ayla hadn't told anyone she was going out. No plans, no messages, no online activity before or after her disappearance. Detectives requested nearby home security footage, hoping for a glimpse of the girl's direction, or even a silhouette beyond the corner of her street. But every camera came back with the same result. Nothing. Either the angle was off, the footage was overwritten, or the view was obstructed. It's like she walked past a line no camera could see, one investigator later said. The detail that unsettled them most came from a search of the area behind her neighborhood. A cluster of abandoned homes, their windows boarded up, yards overgrown. Reports of a man lurking in the area, weeks before Ayla vanished, had been logged but never escalated. It was the first moment detectives realized this case might not be simple at all. By sunrise the next morning, Vacaville police had shifted the case from a routine welfare check to an urgent missing person investigation. What troubled them was not just Ayla's age, but the absolute vacuum of movement after she left home. Most teenagers who run away leave a trail, messages, cash withdrawals, sightings at a convenience store. Ayla left nothing. Detectives began retracing the family's timeline. Officers interviewed her mother first, who kept repeating the same sentence with a trembling voice. "She never goes far without telling me." That consistency mattered. Parents often reveal inconsistencies under stress, but hers never wavered. It suggested something abrupt, unplanned. Meanwhile, a secondary team canvassed the neighborhood. They spoke with dog walkers, construction workers, even a group of teens hanging out near a cul-de-sac. Nobody recalled seeing Ayla after the initial sighting near her block. The gap in visual confirmation widened into a troubling pattern. The digital forensics team examined her phone records. The device disconnected minutes after she walked out, before it could have naturally lost power. There were no outgoing calls, no social media logins, no GPS pings. "It's as if the phone went dark by someone else's hand," one technician said in his early briefing. Later that afternoon, detectives expanded the radius of the search. Aerial drones scanned open fields and irrigation canals. Officers combed trails behind the abandoned houses, where graffiti covered every wall and wind rattled broken vents in hollowed-out structures. They found no belongings, no footprints, no disturbed ground. Nothing to tell them a 14-year-old girl had ever passed through. But by the end of the first 24 hours, one detail emerged that unsettled investigators. A resident reported seeing a dark sedan idling near the abandoned homes the evening Ayla vanished. No license plate. No clear view of the driver. Just a car that didn't belong to anyone around here. Detectives wrote it down. They didn't know it yet, but that anonymous vehicle would become the first real fracture in the timeline, one that would send the investigation in an entirely new direction. The report of the dark sedan was enough for detectives to re-examine the timeline. Vacaville wasn't a large city, and the area where Ayla disappeared, quiet streets framed by fields, rarely saw unfamiliar vehicles after dark. The resident who reported it, a middle-aged mechanic, described the car as older, maybe early 2000s, dark blue or black, with a dent on the rear bumper. He only noticed because it had been parked without headlights, engine running softly, for nearly 15 minutes. Detectives checked traffic cameras along the nearest main road. If the car had entered or exited the neighborhood, a camera should have picked it up. But the entire stretch had blind spots, sections where construction had forced cameras offline in 2016 and never restored them. And those blind spots, detectives noted grimly, aligned almost perfectly with the route leading to the cluster of abandoned homes. The case file thickened. But evidence remained thin. A door-to-door search continued, and detectives interviewed a teenage boy who often biked near the abandoned properties. He claimed he'd seen a man in a grey hoodie pacing the area a week before Ayla vanished. When asked why he hadn't reported it earlier, he shrugged. People hang around there all the time. I didn't think it mattered. But it mattered now. Detectives created a composite based on the boy's description, though it was vague. No facial details. No distinguishing marks. Just a figure. Meanwhile, investigators dug into Ayla's digital life, a necessary step in modern disappearances. They found no signs of online grooming, no suspicious contacts, no secret accounts. Her activity before the disappearance was astonishingly normal. Schoolwork, music, group chats about weekend plans. It didn't match the profile of a runaway. The sedan sighting, the man in the hoodie, the silent phone, each detail seemed to orbit the same unsettling conclusion. Ayla hadn't chosen to disappear. But detectives still didn't know how close danger had been that day, or how long it had been watching. By day 3, investigators narrowed their focus to the abandoned homes behind Ayla's neighborhood, structures long forgotten by the city, but not by the people who occasionally drifted through them. Trespassers, squatters, teenagers looking for a place to disappear for a few hours, or, detectives feared, someone who didn't want to be seen. The search team split into units and moved through each house systematically. Dust covered everything. Broken plaster, boards ripped from windows. A collapsed staircase in one home forced the team to reroute. Nothing looked fresh until officers entered the second-to-last property. Near a back wall, beneath a shattered window, officers found shoe prints, not deep enough to cast a clear tread but distinct in direction, leading in, and then leading out. The impression looked small, possibly a teenager's size. Investigators photographed them, measured them, and asked a forensic specialist to compare them with Ayla's last known footwear. The answer came back frustratingly inconclusive. The prints were consistent with, but not definitively hers. What troubled detectives more wasn't the prints themselves, but what was next to them, a plastic water bottle, half crushed, with no dust on it. Recent, but not recent enough to confirm whether it belonged to Ayla or to someone else entirely. A K9 unit swept the area, but the dogs struggled. The open structures, wind drafts, and multiple overlapping scents made it nearly impossible to isolate one trail. Too contaminated, a handler said, shaking his head. Then came another concern. Officers found signs of someone living inside one of the homes, an overturned bucket used as a chair, a pile of blankets, and a burned-out fire ring. Whoever had been staying there left in a hurry. Recently, detectives now had competing possibilities. Ayla might have entered these homes. or someone else had been watching the neighborhood from them. Either way, the sense of an organized disappearance, something planned, deliberate, began to creep into the minds of investigators. And yet, they still didn't know whether the person fleeing those homes was running from the police, or because of something that happened to Ayla. As the physical search expanded, detectives turned again to what was missing from the case more than anything else: Ayla's digital footprint. In modern disappearances, phones tell stories. They leave trails even when their owners don't. But Ayla's device seemed to defy every expectation. Forensics rechecked the data logs. Her phone didn't gradually lose reception or battery. It went offline abruptly, at a timestamp just minutes after she stepped outside. The phone stopped transmitting entirely. No pings, no tower handoffs, no emergency signals. A drop like that usually means the device was powered off manually, a technician said, or broken. Detectives reviewed her messaging patterns. No unusual conversations, no late-night chats with strangers, no evidence of grooming, secret relationships, or conflicts. Even her browser history was painfully ordinary: school assignments, music playlists, and clothing websites. Nothing pointed toward a reason she would vanish voluntarily. They considered the possibility of a pre-arranged meetup. But again, digital evidence failed to support it. If she planned something, she didn't plan it online, the lead detective told the team. Which gives us two options: she didn't plan it at all, or someone else planned it for her. One detail surfaced from the phone analysis: a failed outgoing connection attempt at 4:12 p.m. A short burst of activity, less than a second, as if the device tried to reach a network but couldn't. Detectives debated whether it was a glitch or something more chilling, a sign the phone was briefly powered on after the disappearance, but in a location where signal couldn't escape. Underground, shielded, or inside a vehicle built with older metal construction. It was a small, fragile anomaly, but in a case defined by silence, even the faintest flicker mattered. By day 5, investigators accepted a difficult reality. The search area around Ayla's neighborhood wasn't enough. Too many leads pointed outward, toward highways, rural backroads, and the edges of town where surveillance thinned and sightlines vanished. Vacaville police expanded the search radius from a 1-mile circle to nearly 8, bringing in county deputies and CHP units. The first major point of interest was a narrow service road that branched off into open farmland. Locals often used it as a shortcut, but it had no cameras, little traffic, and plenty of blind corners. A patrol deputy remembered seeing a dark sedan on that same road a week before Ayla vanished. Slow-moving, unfamiliar, its driver avoiding eye contact when he passed. The deputy hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now the description echoed the earlier witness report almost perfectly. Detectives canvassed ranchers and field workers along the stretch. One worker mentioned hearing a car late the evening Ayla disappeared, engine revving, gravel scattering, followed by silence. Another recalled seeing what looked like fresh tire tracks near a drainage ditch days later, but weather had washed most details away. Still, investigators photographed the area and marked it as a potential secondary site. Meanwhile, a search and rescue volunteer reported something else: a fragment of blue fabric caught on a fence bordering the fields. It was small, frayed, possibly torn from clothing. Forensics tested it, but early results were inconclusive. No clear DNA, no identifiable match. Could be from anyone, the lab tech said, or could be the only thing she left behind. The discovery pushed detectives to examine the broader geography. Vacaville sat between several major routes leading towards Sacramento, Napa, and the Bay Area. Each direction offered anonymity. Each direction offered escape. But the question investigators kept circling back to was the same. If Ayla left her neighborhood involuntarily, where was the first place someone would take her? And why did all signs point away from the city she knew? The radius grew. The mystery deepened. On the 7th day of the investigation, Reiter's momentum began slowing. Detectives received a call from someone who hadn't come forward earlier, a teenage girl, 16, who lived several blocks from Ayla's home. She sounded nervous on the phone, as if unsure whether what she knew mattered. But when detectives met her in person, her story added a layer investigators couldn't ignore. She said she saw Ayla walking near the edge of the neighborhood later than previously believed, closer to dusk, not late afternoon. Ayla was near a stop sign at the end of a long, quiet street, standing still, looking around as if waiting for something or someone. She kept checking over her shoulder, the girl said. Not scared, just unsure. This detail alone stretched the timeline, but what came next stretched the case itself. The witness claimed a car drove slowly past Ayla, a dark sedan, matching earlier descriptions. She didn't see the license plate or the driver's face, but she remembered the way Ayla reacted. She stepped back, closer to the sidewalk, as though giving space but keeping her distance. The car continued past her and turned right, out of sight. A few minutes later, the witness looked again. Ayla was gone. Detectives cross-checked the account with every available detail. Sunset that day aligned with the witness's time frame. The location she described led directly toward the service road and the abandoned homes, reinforcing a pattern investigators were already mapping. Still, one thing bothered them. Why had she waited a week to speak? The girl explained she wasn't sure the moment was significant until news spreads intensified. "I thought she got picked up by a friend," she whispered. "But now, I'm not sure." The late testimony didn't solve the case, but it sharpened the outline of a truth investigators feared. Ayla may have encountered that sedan twice. The second time, no one saw her walk away. The 8th day brought a shift in strategy. With the timeline widened and a new witness statement indicating a second sighting of the sedan, detectives began exploring a possibility they had been reluctant to consider, that Ayla's disappearance followed a pattern already known to law enforcement, one that rarely made headlines but circulated quietly among investigators, targeted opportunistic abductions near suburban buffer zones. Vacaville sat along one such zone, neighborhoods pressed against unmonitored farmland, service roads that fed directly into open county routes, and abandoned structures offering cover. Detectives from nearby jurisdictions were called in to compare notes. One officer from Dixon mentioned a report from early 2017, 2 separate incidents involving a man in a grey hoodie approaching middle school girls near a bus stop. The descriptions were vague, and no suspect was ever identified, but the dates placed the incidents uncomfortably close to the months before Ayla vanished. Another agency recalled a dark-coloured sedan circling a park late at night, weeks before it disappeared from their radar entirely. None of the reports were conclusive, but together they painted a silhouette investigators couldn't ignore. A behavioral analyst brought in by the department laid out a chilling possibility. If someone was scouting, she said, they would watch patterns. Who walks alone? What routes are the least visible? What times parents are home? If Ayla was approached more than once, even indirectly, it suggests she was already on someone's radar. Her conclusion hit the room hard. Investigators re-examined the witness accounts with this theory in mind. Ayla checking over her shoulder, standing still, appearing unsure. Perhaps she sensed something, someone, before the sedan even appeared. The analyst posed a final question. What if Ayla didn't leave the house planning to meet someone, but left because she thought she was being followed? It reframed everything. Detectives returned to the abandoned homes, the service road, the drainage ditch, the broken bottle near the wall, every detail they had logged. Not to look for new evidence, but to reinterpret what they already had. Patterns had emerged, and patterns in cases like this were rarely coincidences. The shadows now had shape, they just didn't have a name. By the second week, public attention began to drift, gently at first, then sharply. News outlets moved on, schools settled back into their routines, and the constant hum of community alerts faded into background noise. But inside the investigation room, detectives felt something different. The search had slowed too quickly for a case with this many unresolved threads. One detective, a veteran with 20 years in missing person work, voiced what others were already feeling. Disappearing without digital footprint, without noise, without panic, that's organized. Someone knew what they were doing. He pushed for a deeper search of the drainage canals running parallel to the service road, an area initially cleared in broad strokes but never fully examined. This time, cadaver dogs were brought in. Specialized units scanned debris buildup, culverts, and water flow logs. Again, nothing surfaced. No clothing, no phone remnants, no personal items. But the search team made a different observation. Sections of brush along the canal had been cut back recently, as if someone created a path. Not wide enough for a vehicle, but enough for a person carrying something. It was subtle. It was old. And investigators couldn't confirm whether the clearing had occurred before or after Ayla vanished. Meanwhile, detectives revisited local businesses for camera footage that hadn't been reviewed earlier. Smaller shops, auto garages, gas stations along county roads. Several had systems too outdated to store video from September 2017. Others had overwritten data within days. A few cameras were broken entirely. The feeling of someone staying ahead grew louder. One young detective summarized it in a late-night meeting. If this was random, we'd have mistakes. A footprint, a dropped item, a camera hit. Something. But we don't. That means either extraordinary luck or intention. It wasn't proof, but it was direction. And direction, in a case this silent, was the only thing they had left. As the investigation pressed deeper into its third week, detectives finally shifted focus from locations to people, specifically, individuals who had appeared on the periphery of the case since day one. Most were routine interviews, neighbors, classmates, delivery drivers, workers who happened to be in the area, but a few statements revealed inconsistencies detectives could no longer overlook. The first person of interest was a man who lived 3 blocks from the Rodriguez home. He owned a small, older sedan, dark-colored, matching parts of the witness descriptions. During the initial interview, he claimed he hadn't left his house on the day Ayla vanished. But when detectives checked with his employer, they learned he had missed work that same week without explanation. When confronted, the man said he forgot the dates, a response investigators found unconvincing. His vehicle was inspected voluntarily. No visible evidence, no interior damage, no personal items belonging to anyone but him. Still, one detective noted the rear bumper had a dent, consistent with what a witness mentioned. It wasn't enough to detain him, but it was enough to keep his name on the board. Another interview led detectives to a transient man who had occasionally been seen around the abandoned homes. He denied knowing anything about Ayla, insisting he had moved out of the property months earlier. But his timeline didn't match what officers found during the sweep: fresh blankets, signs of a hurried exit. When questioned about it, he grew defensive. Still, nothing tied him directly to the disappearance. The most unnerving lead came from a school counselor. She recalled Ayla mentioning, months before she vanished, that a strange man had asked her for directions while she walked home. The counselor hadn't thought much of it then. Teenagers often shared odd encounters, but now the memory felt different, sharper, relevant. Each person of interest added weight to the growing belief that Ayla's disappearance wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated, and whoever orchestrated it had managed to stay just outside the reach of every camera, every witness, and every certainty investigators relied on. By the 4th week, detectives had mapped Ayla's last known movements onto a massive wall-sized timeline. Every witness sighting, every digital timestamp, every uncertain minute. The board looked orderly at first glance, but investigators kept circling back to one issue. The timeline didn't hold together cleanly. There were fractures, small inconsistencies that suggested more was happening than anyone initially realized. The first fracture came from an unexpected source: a delivery driver who worked the Saturday Ayla disappeared. He reported seeing a girl who looked like her near a crosswalk farther from her neighborhood then detectives believed she could have reached on foot within the known time frame. The sighting was unconfirmed, but the direction mattered. It pointed toward the county roads leading north, not west toward the abandoned homes. Then came the second fracture. A neighbor's doorbell camera caught a brief shadow moving across the sidewalk at roughly the time the teenage witness said the sedan passed. The shape was blurry, distorted by motion blur and low light, but detectives couldn't ignore that the figure appeared to be running, not walking. If that shadow was Ayla, it implied urgency, fear, flight, and it contradicted earlier assumptions that she had disappeared calmly or been taken by surprise. A third fracture surfaced from a small convenience store 2 miles away. Their outdated camera system stored only partial frames, but one clip showed a dark sedan passing by at dusk. Same model range, same rear bumper dent. The timestamp overlapped eerily with the witnesses' accounts. The vehicle wasn't stopping, just moving steadily toward rural road access points that led out of Vacaville. Individually, these fragments meant nothing. Together, they created an outline investigators could no longer dismiss. Ayla may have tried to escape something, or someone. She may have been on the move, and the sedan wasn't circling aimlessly. It was following. The case file, once static, now pulsed with a new, chilling rhythm. Ayla's disappearance wasn't a single moment. It was a chase. When investigators overlaid every confirmed detail, every shadow, vehicle sighting, timestamp anomaly, and witness recollection, one location kept emerging on the map. A narrow intersection where the suburban sidewalks bled into open county land. Just beyond that point, Vacaville changed character. Houses disappeared, streetlights thinned, cell towers dropped off, and the world went quiet. Detectives started calling it the vanishing point. Satellite imagery from that evening showed nothing suspicious. No identifiable vehicles, no crowd, no visible disturbances. But the absence of evidence made the location more suspicious, not less. It was the last place Ayla could have been seen by anyone, and the first place someone could make her disappear without being caught on camera. As investigators stood there, boots on cracked pavement, farmland stretching endlessly on both sides, they couldn't shake the feeling that the road itself held answers time had covered. Fresh gravel had been laid weeks after Ayla vanished, wiping away whatever tire marks or footprints might have existed. A specialist in geographic profiling was brought in to assess offender movement. Her conclusion was unsettling. Whoever took her knew this stretch, knew when it was empty, knew how to get in and out without leaving a trail. That meant the disappearance wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't chaotic. It was calculated. The profiler posed one final theory that left the room in silence. If Ayla was running and the sedan was following, the vanishing point is where the chase ended, or where she was forced off the path. Detectives revisited every lead with this in mind. The overlooked brush cuts along the canal, the sprinting shadow, the late-day sighting by the teenage witness, the sudden loss of phone signal, the transient's hurried departure, the first man with the dented sedan, the unidentified figure in the grey hoodie, all different pieces, all orbiting the same place. To this day, no new evidence has surfaced from that intersection. It remains quiet, it remains empty, and it remains the point where Ayla's trail, and every certainty investigators held, simply dissolved into open land. Cases like Ayla's stay with investigators long after the paperwork is filed away. They linger in the quiet moments, when a detective drives past an empty intersection at dusk, or when a forgotten piece of evidence resurfaces in the mind without warning. What happened in those final minutes remains one of Vacaville's most haunting, unanswered questions. A girl who left her home on an ordinary afternoon, and a trail that vanished the moment it reached the edge of the map. If stories like this move you, if you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, and if you want to follow more real cases that still echo through the families and communities they touched, you can help keep these stories alive. A simple like helps this story reach more people. And subscribing to Silent Traces ensures you'll be here the next time we walk together through another unresolved moment in America's hidden history. Thank you for listening and for remembering Ayla.